My name is Melissa Garland. I'm the VP for Client Development at Atlas RTX. We are an AI chatbot company, and we are pleased to be very active in the home building community and have a great many of our clients in that space. And we've been excited to bring this series that we've now done 4 or 5 of, targeted for home builders and talking about what's happening and how to help your business improve through all of the challenges. Today's 45-minute webinar is called Builder Operations Economic Reopening. We've talked a lot about marketing and sales, and even as we have a head of marketing and sales here too, he knows a lot about other stuff as well. So we're gonna focus on operations in today's discussion. So I am joined, as I've mentioned already, by Mike Welty, the Vice President of Home Building for Hartford Homes. Did I just write that in as Hartford Homes when it's not, is it?
Yeah, it is Hartford Homes. Yep.
Oh, I was like, oh my gosh, I wrote the wrong thing. I'm so sorry.
Nope, you're good.
Good. I should trust my writing. Welcome, Mike. And Mike Davidson, the VP of Sales and Marketing for Wunderland Homes. Welcome, Mike D. And just so everyone knows, throughout this webinar, I'm going to call him Mike Davidson, Mike D. And if anybody knows what the reference is to, feel free to put it in the chat.
Glad to be here. Thank you.
And also, I think we'd like to start off by asking those of you who are joining our panel, we're going to make this as interactive as possible. Those of us who joined the webinar, Chris, do you happen to have the poll question? We wanted to find out which markets, there we go, which markets you are all from. Actually, so Sue, good question. I'm going to tell you where the guests are from, but I'd like to know where all of you are from as well, and which states you're in, and what level of impact you have the crisis and the shutdown has had on you. So Chris is going to throw up a question, has a little ABC answer. If you can all respond to it, that would be great. And again, Mike D, you guys, well, you're both in Colorado. Can you tell us cities that you operate in? Mike D.
Yes, you bet. Wunderland Homes is here mostly operating in Denver, Colorado over the course of the last 10 years. We also have operations running in the northern Colorado market now.
Nice. And Mike Welty?
Yeah, so specifically Hartford Homes, we're in northern Colorado. So we're one of the largest privately held builders in northern Colorado right now. We've got about 4 or 5 storefronts and adding a few more here this year, and really been working as a private builder for the last 20 to 25 years.
Nice. Fantastic. That's great. So what we want to do is start with a little bit about what has been the operational impact of the crisis broadly. And we actually pulled some data, which I'll have my friend Chris throw up on the screen here in a second. I think it's important for us to give everybody a sense of how the various markets have been impacted during the crisis. I feel like there are kind of 3 broad buckets. One is like construction and sales completely shut down, right? Kind of that's sort of the far end. The opposite end would be next to no impact. So construction not shut down, sales not shut down, or at least, or maybe it's somewhat altered. And then in the middle ground is where a lot of states have sat, right? Where maybe construction did not shut down, but sales was partially shut down, that sort of thing. So in that scale, and that'll be the question that we ask you in the chat as well. You can see from the slide that we're showing which states in the country were able to retain the status of essential for home building, which had some limited impact, where was it declared non-essential and therefore completely shut down, right? New York, Michigan. And then what you can see on the right are the number of states, so the total is 50 in each of those, the number of states where limited work activities happened, again, construction is essential, and building materials supplies is essential. So all of these impacts, they impact operations, right? That's the first thing and the biggest thing they impact. So I wondered if you guys could speak to both what you've seen in your own markets and maybe what you've heard about from builders in terms of, how this is really, high level, how this has really impacted operations. Mike D, do you want to start?
You bet. So with Wunderland Homes here, we were deemed an essential business right away. There were several different counties that were operating in different ways that we were involved with. And so we kind of had to work our way around those rules. And so I would say that sales was shut down pretty immediately, although, we had to kind of guess at what we could and couldn't do, what that really meant. And so obviously the first priority for us was protecting our employees, protecting our workers. And so we kind of reacted right away to be able to give people that space based on their own comfort level. If they were feeling sick, we made sure that they stayed home, obviously. And so then we started thinking about the revenue impact as well. And so really wanted to make sure that the construction of our homes continued and put a lot of things in place right away that were luckily made available through the NAHB, signage on site, that kind of thing, that made construction move forward. Now, that was for us. And obviously there were lots of phases, and Mike, I think we'll go into that a little bit about the stages of how this has flowed. But, I have a lot of contacts with other larger national builders across the country, and talking with them, preparing for this and just kind of bouncing ideas off of them. I know that there were a lot of markets, as you mentioned, Michigan, New York, that those builders operate in, and it was totally different for a lot of those folks. And I'm sure there are folks on the phone that dealt with this, where everything was shut down completely. What they call a shelter in place in a lot of places. For us was more like they call it a stay-at-home order, essentially. And so the difference is you can't leave, you can't go out of your house. In Colorado, it's a stay-at-home order, which allows people to kind of go out and you can still go to parks even sometimes through this. And they shut down some of the high-touch surfaces. But for those that I knew were totally sheltered in place, it was very difficult. A lot of the virtual meetings became essential for those larger executive teams kind of working through it. But to stop building altogether impacts long-term revenue generation in a big way. And so from what I hear, they were very focused on the future plan and really staying in touch with what exactly was happening. And as things shifted, it's just hard to say what they were doing. But I think now that things are opening up, it sounds like some of those future plans are now coming to fruition.
Mm-hmm. Mike, Welty, what have you guys seen?
Yeah, I mean, being in Colorado, we saw a lot of the same things that Mike Davidson just talked about. But I think, some of the nationwide things that we looked at is, you've got some builders, and you say like Oklahoma, who, had very little mandates, and, we're part of a Builder 20 group, and really their sales have not been affected one bit. They've sold 30 homes in April. This is a small little builder you're talking about. And then to your point, Mike D, is we've got a Builder 20 partner who's in Buffalo, New York, who's basically just been waiting to see when they can start again. And so I think really what that comes down to, I think really one of the buzzwords or what's really come out of this, a lot of companies are looking at is really kind of what's your green, yellow, and red plan. And really as a company, we initially we sat down and kind of did our, okay, are we in the green stage? Are we in our yellow stage? Are we in our red stage? And how long is this going to last? And I think to what you guys were talking about is in the beginning, I don't think really anybody knew really how this was going to start playing out. I think we immediately all went into kind of a yellow phase of planning, which meant that, there might need to be some cuts, or we might need to kind of think about how our overall absorption or 2020 plan is going to look. The nice thing is I think for the good part of America, as we start to kind of come out of this a little bit, I think most builders are starting to look and say, okay, we're kind of still in that yellow, and we're starting to see a little bit of light at the end of the tunnel, how we can actually get into that green plan and get back to absorptions and sales, at least to the 2020 plan that we had. I think we, last week here in Colorado, we had a great week. We actually had more leads last week than in any given week that we did in 2019, which I thought was interesting. So I think the common thing that you're seeing is, obviously web activity is going really well. Leads are up, and now it's really just that feeling and giving people that sense of security that they can kind of go back into the market. But I think as companies and as the operations, as we're running everything, it really, all of our company, and I'm assuming most of the companies out there, really have this plan where they kind of say, okay, if we get to this, then if we get to this amount of sales, then we can say that we're kind of out of the woods for a little bit. Or if things keep going down this road, we're going to have to really figure out what that looks like. And really, I think the interesting piece of this is that I think May and June are going to be very big bellwethers for a lot of builders right now, where we're kind of saying, okay, if we can do well in May, if we can do well in June, then these things will kind of start to turn back around a little bit. And really, the last interesting part that I'll say about it is really, May is kind of the time when things start to kind of throttle down towards the end of the, start of the summer, and then June and July really start to slow down a little bit, and then they pick back up in August. It's going to be really interesting to see if a June is the typical June, right? If June's actually going to be a little bit busier this year, because we've kind of, we have tempered, basically the coronavirus has basically made it so the absorptions have gone down.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And Kevin is raising an interesting question, which I think we'll kind of discuss over the course, which is what's going to be the longer term impact of what's happened, right? Like, will the job losses across the country ultimately prevent a whole swath of buyers from even showing up, right, down the road? So I think maybe we don't know, and maybe we can talk a little bit about what you're modeling out for yourselves in that space. But are you guys thinking that far ahead?
Yeah, we are, and I think some of it's hard to predict, but Kevin brings up a good point. Whereas the oil and gas industry is had a huge impact on housing over the last 5 to 10 years in terms of just the domestic production that's come out of it, and especially for Colorado isn't any different. I'm sure the Texas markets are very similar with that as well, where oil and gas and just the price of gas going down. We're probably going to start seeing some long-term effects with just that, basically that employment sector and those buyers not being able to purchase homes anymore, or having to switch industries and different things like that.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Have you modeled further out as well for your year, Mike D?
Of course, yeah, and really, it's all assumption right now. Our crystal ball is still a little foggy. We have to be realistic about it, and I think the biggest thing this year, as to Mike's point, especially in a colder weather market, the big cutoff for us is June 15th, sometimes July 1st. If you don't have a hole in the ground for a home to start, it's not going to close in that year for the most part, unless you're, building houses in 90 days, which, some can do, but for the most part, that's the bellwether for, what your year is going to look like. And so that's been something we've focused on and really tapered back our year's plan because of what we think we can get in the ground before those dates.
Yeah.
And then beyond that, again, I think it's hard to say. There's a lot of predictions right now that are saying what's going to happen if people get back out, and will we have another explosion of cases and that kind of thing. And so I think, as Mike said, May and June are really going to be a telling tale of what we'll see, at least for this year. And then the changes long term are going to have a major impact, I think, on how we do business in general. And will that be better? Will resale kind of take a step back to where new homes can then make a jump forward a little bit? I don't know. So I'm trying to be optimistic, cautiously thinking about some of the different things that could factor into business for us.
Fair enough. Yeah, really, really good. So as we dig into operations here for the time we have today, I want to talk. Well, let's say it this way. Operations is really about resources. It's about allocation of resources. It's about resources from home building all the way through to people, right? And people in many ways is our most critical resource. And of course, the one that we wish to keep safe and secure. And I would like to talk a little bit about the changes that the pandemic has meant for your businesses in a number of areas, and then talk about kind of what those changes are going to look like going forward. Do you think that some of those things are going to stay and some of those things are going to return back to quote unquote normal, right? So let's talk about people and the real life challenges that the crisis has meant for some people. For large companies, it's almost inevitable that someone in your organization would have been touched directly or indirectly by the virus, right? And that's can be very scary and worrisome. Never mind, whether it means preventing spread of disease or just supporting people as they're going through challenging times. So I'm wondering what procedures you guys have put in place to help support your staff in this time. So Mike Welty, you want to go first?
Yeah. Immediately kind of what Mike had talked about is we jumped into action as quick as we could. And, the health and safety of all of our employees was obviously number one. And really though, but to your point, and really you bring up a great question, Melissa, is, once we said, hey, here's what we want to do and here's how we're going to still function as a company, there was real world people who were involved in this, and there was case by case situations that we really had to kind of dive into and say, okay, how can we help this person? Does this person feel comfortable? And what can we do with that? So really, we did have a couple people reach out to us initially, and after a few procedures were done, and say, hey, I'm feeling a little bit concerned about this or a little bit concerned about this. So we really did have to look at that in a case by case. I think with for us initially, we did reduce sales hours. We went to appointment only, which has been talked about on a national level quite a bit, but I think also too is really one of the challenges, but one of the things we did really quickly was to get the cleaning supplies out on site, get the masks out. And really, if you think about it, as builders, we spend so much time just building processes and creating different ways to sell homes and different ways that we track selling homes and all of our data, is that essentially, for the first 2 or 3 weeks, we were really rewriting the playbook all over again. And so with those procedures, I think a lot of them were, employees first, make sure everyone's safe. I think also HR, rolled out a ton of new policies and a lot of new procedures with making sure that they were up to date. I mean, our HR department was probably the most important department we had during this whole piece in terms of, just making sure that not only are we in compliance, we're keeping up with what the state and legislators are passing down to us, but we're just rolling out all those new procedures. So more than anything, I think to specifically speak to it is, safety first, making sure that they have the processes and the procedures. Some of them we had to kind of, I don't want to say we role played them out, but we did talk about them and say, hey, this is a new thing for you guys. This is something you really need to think. And more than anything, I think the last thing I'll say is we really had to kind of change mindsets with some of our folks, because I think, we always talk about as salespeople is them owning their communities, their $1 million storefronts, them really being the owners of everything. But really, I think there was a lot of concern of like, well, what happens if a trade shows up on site who's not wearing a mask? Or what happens if all the prep we did, a buyer still walks in the office and they're not really following our protocol? So I think more than anything, one of the specific things we did is we really gave the ownership back to the sales and construction team, and ask them to make sure that they're, really let them know that we have their back for one, but then two, that they own the site. And so if they see an uncomfortable situation, that we'll have their back in that, and they can take care of that accordingly.
Yeah, that's great. Mike D, what are you guys doing there to help people?
I think it really started with an alignment of our team. We wanted to make sure that we all got in the same room together. So we developed a daily huddle. Our executive and management team would get together and really get on on a call like this, where we would really kind of talk through what came out overnight, really making sure that the Families First coronavirus response, we had HR on with us a lot at the beginning, and then it kind of tailored off into more of the operations group. But making sure that the management understood that if somebody came to you that was feeling uncomfortable or had a specific health issue, how that was going to be handled. And so that was a really important part of the beginning of this. And that was the biggest thing. And as Mike said, we really have had a lot of empathy, right, and understanding people's situations and feelings about this. And so obviously there are people at this side of the spectrum and that side of the spectrum that are super concerned about this, and there are some that are a little bit more laissez-faire. And that's even dealing with the public and dealing with your trade partners that are on site with you as well. So how do you respond to those folks that maybe are as very concerned and do not want to leave their home, versus the folks that don't want to wear a mask, don't care, don't think this is a big issue, it's just the flu, right? And then figuring out that middle ground. So empowering our team has been a big thing, to Mike's point, this year for us in 2020. I think operationally it's so important that I'm reading a book called Leadership is Language, and it's something I recommend to everybody. It's a Navy captain that talks about how the more the leaderships are just pushing down these policies and procedures and not listening to their frontline workers, it causes a disparity and really, I think, the uncomfortable feelings for people out there. So you have to really listen to the people that are boots on the ground, and what are they seeing and what are they hearing, and really listening and digesting, the information that they're bringing to the leadership group. So we really spend a lot of time trying to talk to everybody, getting on one-on-one calls with our team, and assessing some of those questions around, what are you seeing out there from a level of people who care and people who are concerned. So, I think that dives into sort of, the changing effects on, and I think you're probably going to jump into this, Melissa, a little bit about, working from home and that kind of thing. And so we really did have a lot of conversations with people, sales people who typically work 7 days a week, who've got small children at home. And, they're sending worksheets for a 6-year-old or an 8-year-old, and they can't come into work because they're tasked with teaching their kids, and, they don't have the Zoom set up to where, what do you do with that type of person? And, the warranty person, and the changes there with the expectation that they're to be out and on site in a place where the construction is deemed essential. How do you handle those folks and those appointments, and then how do you backfill with people that maybe don't have the same situation at home? So I think we'll get into that, but those are all, it's been a lot.
That's really great. Did either of your companies insist on any specific things, like everyone has to wear a mask? We've got to rotate shifts in different ways. Did any of those things happen rather immediately for you guys? Either one of you?
Yeah, we did that for on-site for our construction teams, and then now it's kind of starting to filter to the basically to our home office. So now that the mandates are starting to lift a little bit, we did come up with kind of a plan where we basically had all of our directors, because basically in Colorado is mandated that basically only 50% of the office people can be in the office at one given time right now. So essentially what we've done is we've asked our directors to just put together kind of a simple calendar that just filters when everyone's going to be in the office. So we did kind of look at that as a leadership team to make sure that we weren't overstaffed at any given point. Obviously, the mask is, wearing the masks is a big thing right now around the office, and really, the important reason we did those two things and we're doing those things now is that I think, human nature is just that you're going to eventually start to just get a little bit more lax about certain things. So. We've got a few, our HR is definitely keeping us honest with making sure that we wear our masks and all that, those types of things. And really the other example with that, or really the other reason why we just made sure that we're just kind of keeping to those guidelines is that, there's been, you hear kind of a little bit of the horror stories throughout the nation about, some jurisdictions making examples of companies, or, a company did this, so therefore now we're going to restrict this. In Colorado, it basically, we were deemed essential, obviously, but there was a huge discussion what that meant versus real estate agents versus actually new home sales. Because in Colorado, real estate agents couldn't do open houses. But did that mean we could actually do in-site showings or open houses with our own offices? And really, the confusion that circled around that for a couple of weeks was because there were some real estate agents who took some buyers in, weren't really listening to some of the mandates. And then I somewhere along the lines, one of the legislators basically shut it down and just said, okay, well, if they're not listening, then we're going to make an example of this. So right, I think, right. part of our strategy obviously is to keep everyone safe, but to realize that these are real world things that we need to abide by, and making sure that, we're part of the solution and not part of the problem.
There you go. If it's all right, let's jump ahead. Let's talk about the fact that we're all working from home, or most of us are, unless, of course, you're actually building a home, which is hard to do from your house. But most and many other home building functioners have moved to a work from home scenario. And so I know that some managers have had to think about maybe realigning department priorities and making sure that, you're all aligned from a leadership perspective on where you would go with that. How have you approached this question? What has work from home meant for your teams, and is it impacting where you're placing the priorities of your efforts? Mike D.
Yeah, so I kind of hit on it with some of our staff who is working from home, a purchasing group, an accounting group, a lot of the marketing team, and then even some of the sales team, again, with their children being at home. And so again, we've just remained as flexible as we can with them. We did have our HR team sit down one-on-one with each individual and really assess if they could perform a full week's worth of work. Do they really feel like they can actually, with the schedule that they have built with their family, do they have, a work schedule that can allow for 40 hours? If not, the Coronavirus Response Act, the Employee Paid Leave program would be right for them. And so anybody that we assessed, after the one-on-one call that we felt couldn't perform 40 hours worth of work, we would provide them the application information for that paid leave. And so that would backfill, as far as payroll goes, covering those additional 40, hours outside of the 40. So that was an initial way that we worked on it. And then, people would jump in and say, how can I help? When we started making these calls and when we started talking to them, they're like, bring it, give it to me. What else can I do to help? And so we, had an accounting person doing a lot of purchasing work. We had some of our HR team working on, some purchasing bids that had to go out. And so, you find that when you start having these conversations and letting people know how much you care, everybody kind of jumps in and team players required is one of our core values. So it was good to see a lot of our team jumping in and helping each other.
That's very cool. What about over there, Mike Welty, in your world?
Yeah, I'll piggyback off of what the other Mike said is, I think the great thing that's come out of this is that I think some of our teams are actually even operating at a higher function. Mike mentioned our purchasing team. Our purchasing team right now just has so many projects going on that I think even just the change in going to work from home and being able to not be interrupted and really be able to build data and build the systems is really kind of helped. I think the one thing on our end, more of a higher level thing that we kind of focus on is we really just tried to focus on making sure that we didn't get back. We've really worked hard on breaking down silos in the last couple of years in our company. And so, it's kind of one of those things where, in the office, there's just that water cooler conversation, or someone kind of makes a passing comment about a meeting that's happening, or, things can happen very quickly in an office where, side conversations end up kind of dominating what's going on. And you kind of lose a little bit of that, unfortunately, when you just basically go to meetings, all Zoom meetings is, there's a piece of communication that, these meetings are probably a little bit more efficient, but also you're kind of losing a little bit of that human aspect, or, the siloing can kind of crop back up. So I think for us, everything that Mike said is pretty much what we did. We chatted with each individual department. I think also too, one of the big things is we wanted to reiterate to our team is that we wanted to keep the schedules the same, and we wanted to keep the meetings the same. So just because because we were having because we had a kind of change to virtual and changed a lot of that up, we really stressed to our teams to making sure that we followed our processes, that you followed your deadlines, and really, if more than anything, just communicate more. Because like I said, it could get a little tense when you're at home for 7 days in a row and all you're reading is emails and you kind of read one wrong, or something doesn't go the way you thought it was supposed to be. So really for us, it was just trying to make sure that we kept those silos broken down and we just kept the flow of communication going. This is
really interesting, actually. I think this is a discussion that moves beyond home building, but have either of you found that that this, the silo idea is interesting, but have you found that the lack of interaction of teams has either slowed anything down or impacted, I don't know, the next step in the process of a sale or of construction or anything like that, or risked anything with regard to, did you have to put other processes in place to make sure that things don't get dropped as a function of, not all being together in the same place? Either of you, Mike D, do you have any thoughts on that?
It was funny, actually. At St. Patrick's Day, or roughly kind of around then, we had a planned new IT entire overhaul planned. And it was like, we went from a cloud-based system to all Microsoft Office. And so Teams is a part of Microsoft Office, which was launched almost immediately when everybody went home. The office staff, the office was closed, and we had Teams. So we had this brand new software that everybody had to figure out at home. And somehow it just worked that we were able to launch into it, and it encouraged kind of chatting, and we had these Teams meetings set up that we all had to figure out at once together as a management group, and then rolled that down to our entire company. And so we got lucky, I think, with that timing. And so, there's a podcast out there. Patrick Lencioni is a really important person that I like to follow as far as operational strategy. And he was like, open up a Teams meeting or open up a Zoom meeting and just make yourself available. It's like office hours, and anybody could hop in and jump in with you and share that time. So that was a strategy that I used a lot with my marketing, coordinator. And so we would kind of just bounce ideas off each other, and it was really neat to be able to do that. So if you still are working from home, how about just opening up a Zoom room and give everybody the login and password? And even if you're silent and just working there together, you find that you have that interaction, same as you would in the office, to be able to say, hey, what about this or what about that? And so that was one tactic that I really liked. But
yeah,
and I don't want to steal Mike's thunder, but I've watched Mike and even just getting prepared for this webinar, a lot of the things that Hartford Homes has done to really just kind of keep employees engaged, I'm very impressed by, and I'll let Mike kind of dive into those. But you guys did an awesome job through this, Mike, at I think really engaging with your employees and keeping them feeling like you were supporting them in a major way.
So how did you see any issues with, the actual building of homes, Mike Welty? on the home builder VP that you are, is there challenges in making sure that the communication flows through? And
yeah, one of the, obviously trying to keep everybody healthy and safe, one of the things that is really kind of changed a little bit, which for the most part, our schedules are good, but, having only one trade in the home at a time, basically that's what we need to do to keep our people safe, but you're going to have a little bit of slippage with your schedules. And so that's something that that's probably one of the biggest things that we've had to address is, and I wouldn't call it anything monumental, but at the same time, we've had to kind of lay up on schedules just a little bit, knowing that, if guys can't work on top of each other anymore in terms of, getting 5 things done at once in the house, and really only one trade can be in there at the same time, we're going to have a little bit of slippage there. So I would say that's one thing that we really kind of focused on, and it seems to be fine now, but that was kind of one of the unintended consequences of kind of rolling out new procedures.
yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Are there technologies, there obviously are, that you use for planning the building of a house? And so was there anything you implemented to try to, at this time, that you supplemented your planning with, or was it the systems that you already used were sufficient?
Yeah, it was pretty much the systems we already used. It was just making sure that all those were dialed in, and our reporting was correct.
Mm-hmm. And communicating to customers and buyers, I'm sure.
Yeah, we might get into this a little bit later, but the other piece of that is that really one of the big things that's been affected by COVID and just with the industry is also, and to your point, part of the new technologies is, usually, my construction director will probably hit me later, but, usually construction and technology in terms of our construction folks usually don't go synonymous or hand in hand together. So one of the great things that's really come out of this is that our construction team, now that they're doing virtual appointments, has really had to kind of get into the virtual and technological world with us. And I think they've done a great job with that. But for us here in Colorado, we're keeping our builder meetings and our virtual meetings all the way through May 30th, essentially. So we've decided not to pull the plug on that yet. They've been going well. Our surveys have been coming back well, and our buyers seem very happy. So that's been kind of a fun change and a fun advancement that's come out of this whole thing from an operations standpoint.
Yeah, that's so interesting. In fact, let's keep going down that path, because I think a lot of operational folks had to get used to new technologies, or maybe the entire company had to get used to new technologies. The case of your group, Mike D. So, you mentioned, who was it, Mike Welty, that you were just saying had to make some shifts in the tech they used?
So our on-site construction teams, they obviously have iPads and different things like that, but I'd say probably, maybe one of them had ever been on a Zoom meeting before this all happened. And now they're having to be on Zoom meetings in front of every single buyer, they have to, and how does that work when, you're not in the house with a buyer to show them how to turn on a furnace, or, how to make sure that you de-winterize your house and things like that. So there's a lot of, there's just a lot of training and retraining that's gone into that. And again, kind of the fun part of all this that's happened.
And so how did you manage that? How did you manage that process? Did you have somebody new in the company who now had that job to make sure that those folks got trained, or how did that work?
No, I mean, it all just came from our director of construction. They basically started working with them, and really more than anything, it's just like when you roll out anything, you can have a great idea with it, but until you really train to it and until you really spend time on it and focus on it, it's not going to go well. I think we rolled out some initial stuff and with various different programs, and then finally we got hooked up with Ring Central, which allowed us to have more licenses, allowed us to have multiple construction meetings scheduled at once. So basically we could have, 3 different communities having a builder meeting at the same time if they just happen to fall during the same time. And really through our weekly, sales and construction meetings, we really hit on what was going well with them, what can we kind of improve on, and what that kind of looked like. And really, I think more than anything, it's just like anyone else's sales and construction meetings, the peer-to-peer learning is the most important part. Right? When you can have some of your construction folks, if you get 2 or 3 of them to buy in the beginning and they can really sit down and show your team through what they've done, how they've been successful, then that really kind of starts to filter to the rest of the company. And so we've done a lot of peer-to-peer learning and just a lot of trial and error, which is validated for us.
Yeah. Mike D, what kinds of changes have your staff had to make? I mean, certainly when you implement a brand new system like Teams, everyone's got to learn something new. But are there other operational shifts that you've seen happen at Wunderland there to get folks up to speed? And
yeah, so to Mike's point, it's kind of like this theory of old dogs learning new tricks. On the construction side, we have this great system that manages all of our construction schedules. It's an ERP called Mark Systems, IHMS. I think, Mike, you guys use the same one. And they're to be in every house every day, checking off tasks once they're complete. And, the old dogs, I'm going to say, in a lot of cases, which there were a few of them left on our team where, it was just a phone call to schedule the trade. The next trade needed to know that they weren't going to show up. Make a phone call, right? Where the system is designed to say, okay, we're going to restructure the schedule based on whatever you're checking off. And so, they had to get used to using the schedule because, the phone calling went away and we were managing to it. So, the way that works for us is we have a weekly team meeting, kind of like most groups. And the way that operates usually is our management team, somebody from the management team, either myself, our VP of operations, our director of operations, our director of construction, one of us joins that call and we guide those calls based on a report that's printed directly out of the system called the milestone matrix that tracks every milestone all the way from dig to close. And, you're really following the dots to say, okay, you're telling me, Mr. Construction Guy, that the drywall's loaded today. So that milestone matrix should show that that's checked off in the system. Well, that date was a week ago, but you're saying it's just happening today. So holding them accountable to their dates, holding them accountable to using the technology, so that then as a group, as a management team, we can really rely on that report. And so that's been an amazing shift. Really that's happened. Our team has really been using the system a lot because we're, virtual and setting the right expectations. And so, I'll say it's been nice to be able to see those things shifting. And then obviously in my world on the sales side, for a guy who's been maybe in the business for 30 years on my team in some cases, or in, 20 years, 10 years, who's used to just, being that sales guy on site and taking the up and whatnot. We converted a ton of appointments for those people that were using Zoom and Google Duo and FaceTime appointments for their first time in their life. And, just like Mike said, you really just have to train and spend a little time with them. But as soon as they pick it up, our entire team has really jumped into the technology, and it's been an amazing shift. I'm glad that, one of the outcomes of this is that we have started to embrace the technology that we've invested a lot of money in as a company.
Right. And that does seem to be the heart of all this. Are there any technologies or any processes and systems that you've now adopted that you will say, yeah, we don't need that anymore once we get past, I'm going to assume that the better use of many of the planning and processing systems has just nothing but good, right, in it.
Yep.
Is there
Right.
are there any other things though that you can think of that you would say, well, when we're all back face to face, we won't need to do X? Is there anything like that?
Well, the interesting thing about that is if you look at it, like, for example, we've always struggled with what to do with out-of-state buyers when when, you know, they don't want to show up for all the builder meetings, right? Because there's accountability piece where if they're not going to show up for the builder meeting, then we basically can't, you know, are we giving the best possible presentation? Are we giving the best possible experience? And, you know, and those are usually the buyers where if they're out of state and they can't show up for the buyer meeting, or they don't want to schedule, you know, 3 different plane trips to come out, those are the ones where we've always been like, okay, we'll just make an exception to the rule. I mean, now I think more than anything, all of this cool technology and everything that we've rolled out is just kind of you know, more pieces for our toolbox essentially, right? And so even though we may not use everything, and we may eventually go back to face-to-face meetings, obviously, and not do the virtual builder meetings, but you know, how great is it to know that our construction team can now actually hold a Zoom meeting and do this? And so if we've got an out-of-state buyer who and just really can't be there, but is just really fine with doing this meeting, that will happen. So, I mean, to answer your question, I mean, I feel like, you know, we're probably excited about just continuing to roll with all of it in one realm or the other.
Yeah. Anything you'd do with that, Mike, when you go back, Mike D? No.
You said it all, Mike. I think, again, it's not anything that we're going to change. It opens up the possibilities for our team. You know, here in Colorado, we do see a lot of, you know, out-of-state business. And so it does help us in that realm. And the closings, you know, I think the change in closing procedures has also allowed for a lot more remote closings for people. I'm excited to kind of see how, you know, we may be able to just close a home in their house, you know, have a notary remote, have the title company come to their house. You have your orientation the day of closing, you sign all the paperwork in your home, you have the keys. I mean, you're done. I think that could be a really big shift that we've been looking forward to. I think that makes the experience so much better rather than driving around town to close after you come walk to your house and come back and you move right in.
Right. So in the last minute or so, like let's touch on a couple more of those things. What sort of things will become part of the new normal? Everyone's favorite phrase. You know, working from home. Can you imagine in your companies that anybody will continue to work from home? Like you don't need them to come to the office anymore? Mike D?
We will have a couple that are high risk who will continue to work from home until this all goes away. And does this all go away is the question, right?
Yeah.
You know, do we shift through the summer and then back into the flu season? And is that going to be a concern for those folks? So we are working on ways to continue to allow certain folks in certain roles to work from home.
Nice.
But there are obvious roles within home building that you just can't do that. And so I think we've discussed what those are, and shifting in resources and allowing people to jump in and do different duties is something that we're considering and talking about.
Nice. And Mike Welty, what about frontline worker protections? I assume, is that something that, once we get the clear, we stop doing that, or what's your thinking there?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to predict. I mean, I think we're always going to be a little bit more overcautious on our end until, you know, I mean, whatever that looks like. It's hard to say if there's a vaccine or if things just eventually go away or what that looks like. So yeah, we're going to continue to be overcautious in that realm, just to make sure that we can continue to move things forward and keep the safety and the health of our people number one.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then I think what I'd like to wrap up with is, since we're at our last minute, what if of all of the technologies that you've invested in, either pre or during the crisis, which one like had the greatest impact such that you might be advising anybody who's listening, like, look, if you haven't invested in this, you should, or if you haven't investigated this, you should. What are your thoughts there, Mike D? Anything?
Certainly, luckily we invested them all beforehand, but Zoom, DocuSign are, you know, if you look at the activity we've had on either of those platforms, it's just, I mean, shot up. So, you know, if you're not using those, I'd recommend it. DocuSign for all of our builder, you know, orientation lists, DocuSign for all of our, obviously, sales contracts have been critical. You know, aside from that, this Teams rollout has really been something that I would recommend everybody looking into. Again, engagement on a one-to-one basis has been pretty awesome through Teams.
Mm-hmm. Mike Welty?
Yeah, besides all those, you know, one of the things that we started this year right before COVID, but I think has helped us out tremendously is it's a program called My Home Story. You can Google it, it's My Home Story. And essentially it's just a virtual web page that's created for each single buyer. So as your buyer or as your sales team is going out and taking pictures of, you know, the progress and what's going on in the buyer's home, they can actually upload it from the site, upload it to a personal web page for the buyer. and essentially it kind of creates their own page. So that's been kind of a virtual piece that we started right before this all happened that we feel like has really kind of enhanced our customer service pieces as well. And then of course, I'll give you guys a plug as well, but we've been using Atlas for about 2 years now. And, obviously you want to continue genuine conversations and you want to continue to reach out to your buyers on a genuine level. But through Atlas and through your guys' mass texts that we've been doing every month, we've really been able to get a lot of information out at once. When COVID first started, how we were utilizing your guys' program wasn't so much of, hey, we've got a new promotion, come out and buy a house. It was more of just, we're here, our sales officers still open and we're kind of getting through this, and we'll, if you have any questions for us, please let us know. And then now our messaging has kind of slowly started to change like everyone else's, where now we can kind of start getting back into setting a little bit more urgency and talking through what actual real promotions are and different things like that. So I think between us, My Home Story and Atlas have been good.
And I did not pay him to say that, by the way. So thank you. Thank you very much for that, for adding that in. And we are out of the allocated time for our discussion on operations. I do have a couple more questions in the chat that we'll continue on with. So for those of you who are able to stay, please do stay with us. But I do, before we jump to those questions, I want to say for everyone else to hear, big thanks to both of the mics for joining us for our operations discussion today. And for those who are heading out, if you would like to learn any more about Atlas, please feel free to reach out to us at success@atlasrtx.com. We'll have a recording of this webinar that we will share with all of you. And we will have another webinar coming up again next week, 10:30. We're going to be meeting with Meredith Oliver, who's a sales trainer and someone who has got kind of a well-known book and speaking tour on sales, as well as Jennifer Walsh, who's with Pacific Lifestyle Homes. They'll be joining us next week. So really quick before we wrap up then, let's see, Audrey was asking about more creative ways to generate website traffic. Mike D, that sounds like that one goes to you. How are you guys thinking about that?
We were definitely thinking about it, and we did take a step back to Mike's previous point during all of this, and so now we're starting to ramp up ideas on how we do that. Really, kind of we're in that stage right now where we're working on those promotions and lead generation. But what we really did take a step back to do is, hey, if people have come in or submitted their information during this time, they're obviously interested, right? And so how can we take that funnel, which we believe should convert a lot better, and convert them from a lead to an appointment to then, buy a house? And so we really did focus on promotions of those folks that were in the funnel during this time. And so now we're working on some programs and obviously assessing the landscape of what other builders are doing and wanting to remain relevant and competitive and being able to drive traffic. So certainly we're back into driving leads and traffic now and starting to come up with those ways and means.
Gotcha. That makes sense. Another question was around which of the sales techniques, and both of you probably are aware, whether it's virtual tours, online shopping or buying or selling, elevating the role of the OSC, are those things that are going to stay? Or are there things that are going to go back to the old ways of doing things? Mike Welty, maybe I'll give you the chance to take a shot at that one.
Yeah, I think the fun part about this whole thing is that really, if for example, if you look at Zillow offers, right, they probably rolled that out, I'm just guessing here, but 3 or 5 years ago, and it was probably way before their time, right? It basically, the technology was there and it really was needed to be there, but I think a lot of people just get stuck in their old ways. And now with COVID, I think really what we're seeing is the timing was pretty much forced on everybody to just create a lot of these things. So, I mean, specifically, I just feel like this industry is not, especially if you're in a market where you had to shut down and you had to adapt. There's probably some markets that didn't have to shut down as much, but if you were in one of those markets that did, I mean, I feel this is going to be it's going to be almost an arms race of who can keep outdoing each other in terms of new technologies and what that looks like and how we make it simple and easy for the buyer. And really the reason that's going to transition now is because now the buyers are getting used to it. They were forced to do it as well. And so I think now as buyers are getting more used to buying virtually, they have friends that have purchased virtually, every single builder is going virtual, then really it's just the technology, or the times are finally catching up with the technology, basically.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I mean, I don't think most of us would have said even 8 weeks ago that we could imagine someone buying a house sight unseen, right?
Yep.
And yet and by sight unseen, I of course mean not seeing it in person, but there's so much we can do with video and these technologies to make it possible, it seems. Did you see virtual closes at all, Mike D, in your world?
Oh,
And
absolutely.
virtual sales, I should say, virtual sales.
Yeah, like I said, with some of my best, longest term sales guys, they sold 4 houses in a week. All 4 of the houses were sold sight unseen, and it can be done. It's going to be done. There are builders across the country now that have a pay, to send your earnest money to us. There are builders scrambling how to figure that out. It's happening. It's going to happen. It should have happened a while ago. People are buying on Amazon and trillions of dollars, right? And so we've got to follow suit and figure out a way to serve that market.
Yeah, that's great. Well, I think this is all we have time for. Any last comments or observations you want to share with anybody before we go? No? All right.
It's been fun. Thank you.
Yeah,
this has been
you
great.
both.
Thank you so much.
It's been a real pleasure to have you both with us, and a lot of fun to talk about this. So best of luck to everyone out there who's viewing. We'll send you all the video, and we'll see you next week.